I bought this lot in Moscow nearly 30 years ago. 15 dolls covering nearly 500 years of Russian tyranny and dictatorship through Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, to Lenin and Stalin. But now, the latest Russian strongman, Vladimir Putin, faces a real threat from Alexei Navalny. Who is Navalny, and what does he stand for? This is the Michael Crick report for Mail Plus. Alexei Navalny knew what was in store. Last month, he flew back to Moscow after treatment in Berlin for the Novichok poisoning he'd suffered in Russia last summer. He was arrested and jailed for 2.5 years for an old, probably bogus, fraud conviction. A close advisor based in London is Vladimir Ashkurov. Was that an easy decision for him to make, to go back to Moscow?
I don't think easy is the right word. After I talked to him and after he started, writing and speaking, I realized that there's no point in bringing it up with him, because that's what he intends to do. So he understood that going back to Russia probably would mean incarceration.
But it might also mean that they try and poison him again or kill him some other way.
That as well, yes.
15 years ago, the Russian journalist and defector Alexei Litvinenko was poisoned in London, very likely by the Russian state. His widow says Navalny went back home to remain a player in Russian politics.
His decision to go back to Russia, it was a very brave decision. And because Alexei Navalny, described himself as a politician, he knew staying abroad, he would die as a politician for people in Russia. And being back to Russia, it was a very difficult decision. But for Alexei Navalny as a politician, it was absolutely right.
Across Russia, from Moscow to Vladivostok, his jail sentence stirred thousands to brave the cold in protest. Navalny's fame rocketed among millions of Russians who may never have heard of him before.
Putin really does need to fear Navalny. For several reasons. One is Navalny as a person is very charismatic and engaging and hard-driven and so forth. He's a very good performer. Secondly, Navalny in some ways isn't important so much for himself, but that he has become the catalyst. When we saw the people coming out on the streets across Russia recently, it wasn't so much for Navalny, it was just more generally that they were fed up. They were fed up for all kinds of different reasons, but one way or the other, they didn't enjoy the status quo. And Navalny is the one person who can bring all that together.
Age 44 and part Ukrainian, Navalny grew up in a town 60 miles from Moscow. His parents own a basket weaving factory. He became a lawyer and active in opposition politics, using lawsuits, blogs and films to expose crime and corruption by Putin and his friends. His latest film, released after his recent arrest, claims this palace belongs to Putin, which Putin denies. So he's against corruption and pro-democracy. But what else would Navalny do if he held power?
It would be less regulation in economy and more privatization. On the other hand, it would be higher minimum wage for people to lift people out of poverty.
One of the things that really does genuinely drive him is this outrage at the fact that his country is being ripped off by the people who are running it. I mean, this is the interesting thing. Navalny is a patriot. This is not some kind of woke Western sort of an ideal of a liberal politician. This is a man who actually is much more complex. And I think his main thing is precisely he's a patriot who actually thinks that what Russia has at the moment is not what Russia deserves.
And that patriotism includes the view that Crimea, which Putin seized 7 years ago, is now Russian and should remain so, even though the UN says it's legally still part of Ukraine.
He thinks that the Russian annexation of Crimea was a crime and a mistake, but there are certain decisions that you cannot easily roll back. Once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you cannot put it back in.
Marina Litvinenko thinks Navalny will survive, in contrast to her husband Sasha, who was murdered in 2006, at a time when the West tended to turn a blind eye to the crimes of the Putin regime.
I hope for Alexei Navalny, it would be not the same scenario, because he is a more prominent, he is so much well known, and now we don't need to prove how dangerous this regime. When it happened to my husband in 2006, it was very difficult to prove Russia is a criminal state and ready to kill people abroad and inside of their own country. And this might help Alexei Navalny to escape for the worst things, but we never know.
And could Navalny hold power himself one day?
Well, to be honest, I mean, I think it will have to be after Putin goes. And it could be because precisely his own men in grey suits will turn against him one day if they regard him as too much of a liability, or maybe mortality will take its toll. I mean, he's 68. I don't know if you can overdose from Botox, but who knows what can happen. Then I think we will begin to see real changes in Russia, and in a way a chance for Navalny or someone like him. Because after all, remember, I mean, he's 44. Putin is 68. It's totally different political generations. But also it means that if Navalny can survive, he certainly can rely on the long game.
So will Russia one day pack up its hundreds of years of autocracy and embrace Western-style democracy with checks and balances on the people who hold power? Frankly, Russia has never really been a democracy, at least not for very long. And the odds on Alexei Navalny, or indeed anyone else, achieving that must be pretty slim.